Coming up, the NBA playoffs have showcased that centers are starting to play a more critical role back in the NBA once more. How Nic Claxton, with a hefty price tag, could end up being too rich for Brooklyn Nets, but still benefit them from a roster construction standpoint. We dive in on the alternative options coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And Doug, if there's one thing that we're learning from quality teams in these NBA playoffs, is that center position all of a sudden is ramping back up value, and the depth on some of these rosters has proved critical throughout these runs.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we're going to talk about how this could possibly, maybe even probably affect the Nic Claxton market going into this year. And as you look through these playoffs, big centers who kind of are defense only guys all of a sudden have been really, really important. We see Dallas get to the finals with playing two of these guys all the time, sort of unheard of, in Gafford and then Lively, who's been absolutely awesome. And then, before that, you see Gobert into the conference finals. And so you're thinking, is there a changing of the guard? There's some other things that are really important to have with these guys in order to keep them on the court. But there are teams out there who could look at Nic Claxton and another center who's going to have a pretty big market here, also living in the New York area right now, there could be the bidding could just start to jack up a little bit in a way that I'm not sure we thought it was going to be. And I think it could put the Nets in a really tricky spot.
So one of the things we're going to talk about today is looking at alternative options. So we're setting the benchmark, as it's been talked about, 20 to 25 million potentially for Nicholas Claxton. We're going to go high bar with any of these things. So if it's going to be 25 million a year for Nicholas Claxton, alternative options and how you try to balance out this roster. But from a philosophical standpoint, it comes back to what we keep talking about this offseason. Should the Brooklyn Nets be trying to position themselves to go get a star next offseason or look at other players whenever they come available and want to compete and still stay on the narrative that we're going to compete and try to win now? If that's your philosophy, then keeping Nicholas Claxton at any cost, quote unquote, can make sense to a certain extent. But if you're talking about what we suggest, trying to build for the future, thinking about improving this team, clearing money off the books, getting out of the Ben Simmons contract, to lock yourself into that contract and not think that you're going to be ready to compete in 2024 and even 2025, that would probably be the worst combination of both worlds, right? So at a high level, it's what is your philosophy about your organization and where you think you are over the next 2 seasons when it comes to Claxton?
Okay, so you could probably go either way with this. You're like, okay, well, he's 25. He's going into his age 26 season. He's going to get paid here. You retain the bird rights, he makes it all the way to unrestricted free agency. You sort of like, you have him under control for a while. Trading with the bird rights is important going forward. He maybe fits a scheme where it's like he's young enough that you could probably hit the reset button a little bit around him, and it's not going to be a total killer. And you can picture yourself, once Simmons is out of the mix, most other guys you would bring in, he'd be a fit to play like good switchable defense. This one's a really close call for me. I don't know. I hate to be wishy-washy about it because I know people you want to come in with a super hot take. I think that this one is like right at the far edge of my comfort level around how far you should go with the money, what kind of timeline he fits. Is this a guy you want to pay $25 million a year to if the bidding really starts going up, even with the salary cap going up? 25 million would be right around 18% of the cap. It's really close. It does help that we've seen some of these centers perform well in high leverage playoff spots where you're like, hey, a true 5 just still has a place in the NBA. That's good news. but you have to have other guys on your team that are able to unlock those guys too. And so, and the Nets don't have that guy, and you have to count on getting him, right? I mean, so this is where you hear me kind of going back and forth. It's great if you get the next guy. If you do not get the next guy, it is a massive overpay, and that's close. It's a really close call.
And that's what the problem is, right? As we always, I like Nic Claxton. I borderline love Nic Claxton. I want him to be a Brooklyn Net for life. It's one of my favorite things when a player is drafted by a team, developed by a team, stays with a team, gets paid by a team, and is a lifer. And that's not just associated with how much winning or success the team has, but you mentioned it there too. It's not just about having the superstar, the Donovan Mitchells of the world, whoever it may be, or next off season. That's one part of it. But then it's also looking inside the current roster right now and saying part of the problem is it's not even Nic Claxton's problem. It's the rest of the roster's problem. There's not enough other guys that do some of the other things where you say, okay, so he's a non-shooter. That's all right. Okay, so Claxton is not the biggest body to be playing at 5. That's all right. Well, unfortunately, the Brooklyn Nets are a lean team. They're not a particularly deep team at the position. They're also not a shooting team at the position. So when you add those up, it shouldn't count against Claxton, but it at least sets the premise of, well, if you commit to him, what's the other thing you do? Because what I actually think happens here is we'll talk about, I don't mean that this is what I believe will happen. We'll get it back at the end of the episode. But if the Nets keep Claxton, what the fan base is going to do is sit and judge him based on, well, you're not shooting from the outside. You don't do certain things. You can't body up against Joel Embiid. You're going to start to spend a season associating his price tag with what he can't do for you. And that's kind of going to be faulty logic because it's really going to come down to what this team lacks in totality to maximize what his value can be. And that's why some teams on the market are going to look and go, oh yeah, with what we have on our team right now, Nic Claxton's a perfect fit. It's just, he's not the perfect fit for Brooklyn in this moment, right?
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, if you look at it from, that's a great point. By the way, that actually that's probably the best point. We'll make this whole podcast is that, as we've said many times, and you framed it really well there, is that with the money comes the expectation, and the second you get paid, look no further than one Mr. Cam Johnson on this team. Cam Johnson signs for 18 million this year. It's like, oh, nice contract. He doesn't play well. He's hurt the whole time, and there's a certain segment of folks that want him off the team already, right? And it was just a major, major disappointment. If he has that season at $8 million a year, nobody cares, right? Like nobody cares. But it's when you start making that money, yes, it does sometimes become more about what you can do than what you can do, because what you can't do, you are now cost prohibited from finding the person who can do the thing you can't do, right? Because now you have to pay. Now you have to pay for the thing you can't do. And that becomes a problem. Go back to, I mentioned these Lively and Gafford. Well, the other thing I left out about those guys made $16 million combined, and they just gave you 48 minutes of center, basically, on a team that's going to championship. 16 million for 48 minutes of center a game. Okay. You got a lot of leeway with how you play. When you make 25 million and it's butting up to 20% of the cap, you have to do a ton in that case. And that could end up being, a problem that we talk about later. And this is where the money and the expectations all come into it. We've got a ton more to talk about here with Nic Claxton. Got some other guys that are possibly pivots if the Nets get forced out of these possible sweepstakes with Nic Claxton. We'll get into that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn. Look, if you're hiring for your small business, you got to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. Oh, I wish you could find free agents on LinkedIn Jobs. It's like the one kind of job you might not be able to find. Everything else is available on LinkedIn Jobs, except for maybe NBA free agents. But that's okay. You're running your small business. They got the right tools to find you the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It's a vast network. More than 1 billion professionals. Makes it the best place to hire. Gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all this. Makes up while making the process super easy, very intuitive. Hiring's so easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy. In fact, it's 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. For all you math majors, that's less than a day. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, so as we continue the Locked On Nets episode, talking about a key topic for the Brooklyn Nets offseason, Nic Claxton. Is he going to become the target in what is also, as we've said, a bit of a weak free agency class. So all of a sudden, the guy who's 25, going to be 26, about to hit his prime, has this defensive versatility, can also run the floor, space it, get at the rim, all that stuff. It's going to be valuable. And if you are a team that has more cap space and flexibility, all of a sudden you'll say the overpay is worth it because what it means for us, it means a deeper playoff run. It means moving the needle on expectations. As we know, you can keep Nic Claxton. You can keep this team intact. We said this before this offseason, and nothing can change. It could be the exact same thing that you've seen for the last year and a half, and that's a non-playoff basketball team. Before we talk about alternative options, though, looking internally, how much can we look at inside that, let's call it the 4-5 room? We've already talked about Dorian Finney-Smith, the need to move him to get back into the draft. We can talk about Noah Clowney, and there is versatility there. He can shoot, but I think we look at him being ideally at a 4 or small ball 5. And then there's also Day'Ron Sharpe, who's going to be up for an extension eligibility. What is that number going to look like? When you look inside the Nets room, part of the reason for this discussion is take away the $25 million, and what is your ideal mold of player to bring in to benefit a Cam Thomas, as we talked about recently, and also to slot guys like Mikal Bridges more into their role, a 3-and-D, and not a guy you ask to get on ball and take guys off the dribble. That's part of this equation too, what the Nets lack on their roster currently.
Right. So like if they were to reallocate the Claxton money to somewhere else, I have to look at like sort of primary ball handling as a core need for this group. And just to round back out to so that's where I would just say that on a high level. But just going back to like the 4-5 room for the Nets, right, as it currently stands, I agree with you on the Clowney part. And by the way, but Clowney and Claxton's numbers together is only about 100 minutes this year, but it's really good on defense.
It's good. I know.
Like a 109 defensive rating or something like that, 108 defensive rating. And so you can envision a scenario where he starts with the 4, and this is just like a really, really good defensive group, and that makes up for a lot. And you get a floor spacer at the 4, while also having like elite rim protection. The other thing I would feel even better about moving on from Claxton, except that Day'Ron Sharpe was just like non-existent to end the year this year. Like he was DNP'd. He really wasn't on the court. It seemed like a great time to like play him a lot. They just didn't. Now that could be a Kevin Ollie thing. It could be an organizational thing. Like I'm not sure. That was a little bit of a mystery to me, like why he didn't get a ton of minutes. Lucas Kaplan from Nets Daily did a great piece showing actually the growth that Day'Ron made on both ends of the court, with a little caveat of confusion about why he didn't play that much late. So that one becomes a little confusing. So I would feel great about like their big man room with that moving on, or I'd feel okay about it without Claxton, except for that. And if they were to reallocate the money, I'd say they'd have to roll with those guys and find someone else that can unlock the big men in their lineup, like a true point guard. And that's also tough to find.
And that's part of the problem. Again, with Claxton's value, do you like his skill set, all those things. But when you look inside the room, or you look at the free agency, you say, so are we just boxing ourselves into re-signing Nic Claxton because Day'Ron Sharpe fades down the end of the season? Because we like what we have in Noah Clowney, but are we ready to fully turn that over, or to have to figure out how to piece this thing together? And by the way, there's nobody else in that room, especially when you add in whether you like small ball lineups or not. We're advocating for Dorian Finney-Smith to not be a part of this roster. So let's take away Nic Claxton, then take away Dorian Finney-Smith, and then have a conversation about just how do you fill out the minutes there between Day'Ron Sharpe, who was basically a non-factor, and then a second-year player, but for all intents and purposes is going to be coming in as a rookie, very young, in Noah Clowney. That's a part of the issue here. The saving grace, if you want to look at it from that side for Brooklyn, is, again, we're going to have Ben Simmons money come off the books. The cap's going to go up. You're going to have Dorian Finney-Smith maybe comes off, even if it's another year from now. Dennis Schroeder will come off. You're not going to be restricted from making other decisions. And you're also not going to be restricted from 2 years from now when you have a player, Nic Claxton, who's entering his 27 and 28 years of his career. He might still be valuable for other teams. And that number won't look as bad, especially if you structure the contract a little bit like the Cam Johnson one, where it's descending money when you get into that last year of it. So the Nets can manipulate this a little bit to say, tell me there's a better option and we would go for it, but there's not. So in lieu of that, we're going to stick with what we know, see how this young tandem develops with Noah Clowney. And then, by the way, our options are still open going forward. And that's not a terrible spot to be in. I still want to paint the picture of what alternative decisions could you make. But do you think that's probably a little bit of what the Nets are discussing inside the building right now? Is like, hey, are we really worried about if we win 40 games or 36 games? Like, does the number really matter here to stay committed to Nic Claxton outside of the PR, which is handing out some contracts that a lot of people on the outside go, wow, you're really overpaying to keep your guys, whether it's Claxton or a player that came over in the trade like Johnson, because you feel like you need to retain these pieces that represent something for your organization.
Yeah, it's always so hard to tell with that. It is easier to like just pay guys that are already in the building, and aren't the only guys that do this, right? They're not the only team that do this. So, because it's just the, it's the guy you have is easier than going and paying for someone on the open market, right? Like,
sure,
you still have to go replace the guys and try to find them, and that can be just harder out there in the free agent market. The Nets don't have a lot of early draft capital here, where you maybe could squeeze some of that out of the draft in like this kind of draft, but that doesn't seem like it's maybe lining up totally right now. So there are other just kind of logistical reasons for why you would end up doing it. I think the way we've seen the Nets structure some of these contracts too, where the money is like the lowest in 25. We've seen that with Cam Johnson's already, right? Where they're just sort of opening up money, trying to keep that as clean as possible. And we saw that Cam Johnson already is going to be less of a cap hit because he didn't hit some bonuses in his contract. And so, so, I mean, I guess
lucky us. Cam Johnson was too injured to hit any of the marks that he needed to make more money.
So funny. So yeah, I think this is where they're going to end up landing. They've shown all signs that this is going to be the case. And again, it's really like not an anti-Claxton thing. It's mostly just like,
no.
We're mostly saying it as if the market does become nuts. Because I think at first we were thinking, oh, maybe there's just not a super robust market for Claxton, and that helps keep the cost relatively in check. But am I getting
right? And are you overpaying against no one? Like, you're overpaying to overpay versus having to because the market demands it.
Right, like the Cam Johnson seemed like possibly a slight overpay, just to overpay. We said that in the moment, and I'll stick with that. Right, Pistons were lurking, but it just didn't seem like they were kind of bidding against themselves. That could not be the case here with Claxton when we thought it might be, and this is the tricky spot. And I still think they probably end up doing it and just going to whatever the number is because of all the reasons we've said. And it probably won't be a total killer. If you think, okay, well, look, this guy was on a good team. When they were good, people talked about him for all defensive team. It was only when they were bad that he didn't show up there, right? And that's like not so much his fault. We've talked about many times they don't have the other guys on the roster to unlock him. Like, that's not his fault. Like, there's things that aren't on his fault that actually that could get cured here pretty quickly, and then we wouldn't be talking about it as much. So, yeah, man, this is I don't know. Maybe I'm all the way, and I'm paying him at this point just because for some of these reasons. I don't know.
Well, because it's funny too, right? A lot of the conversation about Nic Claxton is about everybody else other than Nic Claxton. It's not about him. It's about what is not around him. And we've had that conversation about Cam Thomas as well. Coming up here in a second, I'm going to put out two options, another path this offseason for Brooklyn, and whether or not it would help them moving forward and start to shift the supporting cast around key pieces, Cam Thomas, Mikal Bridges being chief among them. We'll get into that coming up here next.
All right, before we get into that, I'll tell you about our friends over at eBay. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championship. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance. They got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Maybe you're into speed, maybe you're into power, maybe it's style. eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts, for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, that part's guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the Locked On Nets episode, talking about Nic Claxton and what could be a very dangerous offseason for the Brooklyn Nets if the market starts to rise for him, and whether or not they should ultimately pay him. An interesting thought that I had about it coming off of our Cam Thomas discussion the other day, another one of our 100% fresh, A-plus graded episodes you should go check out for sure, is making more complementary fits around a Cam Thomas. So when you look at the free agent market, which classic Brooklyn Nets, when they maybe need to or want to make decisions like this, it's a pretty barren market. So go ahead and try to find the best bet. But if we say Nic Claxton lives at the top at $25 million this offseason, I'll go ahead and put a player like Obi Toppin at the top of his projected market at $15 million. Could go anywhere between 10 and 15. That's at least projected right now. We'll see how it shakes out. What's nice about a player like this, not because he's a like for like swap or because you're going to go ahead and put him in five, at the 5 in big lineups and have him body up against players in a different way, but he represents a little bit of what we talked about, Trendon Watford-ish, like, oh, what can this guy do? Shoot a little bit, can run at the rim, can get at the basket sometimes. And when you go look at his stats, talking about playing 82 games, averaged a career high 21 minutes. So you're talking about a player coming off the bench and contributing, but he's a player that can knock down so far career 35%, 40% from beyond the arc this past season. And if I think about Cam Thomas trying to drive the paint and kick and have guys around him that can do more than just rim run, well, all of a sudden the floor spacing can kind of still have some real integrity and some real threat if we believe in Noah Clowney and what he can do from the outside, and then maybe a player like Obi Toppin. I'm not telling you he's the greatest thing in the world on free agent market, but it would represent a pivot. And then you tell Day'Ron Sharpe, knock on wood, fingers crossed, get in there, rebound the heck out of this ball. That's all you do. We have other bodies to handle these other skill sets.
Yeah, and this would be the situation they'd probably be looking at, right? Like they would be the center, because Isaiah Hartenstein, we said that he was the guy we alluded to at the beginning. He could be commanding a pretty big contract as well. Looks like the Knicks will probably re-sign him at a pretty hefty number. It'd be interesting to see which one of these guys go first, because it could set the market for the other. Like it actually could be the market setter for the other one. And I wonder if that's something that the other, if either you're trying to get out ahead of it, right, and be the number, or you're coming after. It'll be interesting to see the order of operations there. But yeah, if you miss out here, guys like Toppin would represent not a one-to-one, pivot for Claxton, like you mentioned before, but another big body, is obviously athletic, played some leverage playoff minutes, doesn't rebound the position amazingly well for his size. So that's a little bit of a problem, but can floor space, he can knock down corner threes, which is what they really asked him to do in Indy. Yeah, they would be looking at that, but it would mean like sort of a pivot away from what the style they wanted to play too. Again, they could be forced into doing this, and it might not be the worst thing if we think, well, Claxton without a point guard is really, really neutral, like threat neutralized, right? And that is kind of the problem too. And this is where you wish so bad you already knew who the next guy was, because then the Claxton thing would be so much clearer. Right. If you knew you had this other guy, like even if you knew you had Mitchell, right, who can run pick and roll.
Oh, sure.
Like even if you had him, you're like, fine, good. Okay. It makes sense now. But not having that guy yet makes that question harder. And that is where guys like Toppin are a little bit more malleable, even if they're worse, like worse player,
right.
Like, but cheaper.
Yep.
And a bit more versatile for a team that desperately needs versatility at this point because they don't have it. So that's why I think that's a good name to throw out, even though people are going to be like, oh, he's worse than Claxton. Okay, we get it. Obviously. But that's not the point.
Not making that case.
No, that's not the case. Adam's not making that. And he's correct, right? He's correct. He's like, if you can't get this guy, then versatility should be the key.
And oh, by the way, if you're talking about 25 million for Claxton or 15 for Obi Toppin and just thinking long-term, not thinking about how competitive are they going to be this year. Hey, turn on next free agency when you're already going to have big money coming off the books. Well, an extra 10 million can help move the needle on signing 2 big name free agents as opposed to maybe 1 or having to manipulate it. So it does, it does play a factor in the long-term future. The other thing that you mentioned inside of this episode, before we give our stamp of approval on what we believe the Nets will do with Claxton this offseason, is talking about having a true on-ball facilitator. And it's ironic. Maybe you don't re-sign Nic Claxton and you sign Obi Toppin and a more traditional point guard, and you go, oh boy, if we had Nicholas Claxton now with that point guard, it might serve to benefit it a little bit. This is not a great class to have this kind of discussion, and it's not a great player to throw out here. I feel less excited about saying Tyus Jones' name as opposed to Obi Toppin. Don't know what the market's going to look like for him, but when you think about a guy that's undersized, be a really small backcourt, but this would kind of benefit everybody. Hey, you want to get the ball out of Cam Thomas's hands for a stretch? All this dude wants to do is set the tables for others, can help set up any rim running type of guys you have on the roster. Maybe it is Obi Toppin as well. Maybe it's also still having Trendon Watford there, right? So I don't know what his market will end up being, but the big picture here is Nicholas Claxton, it's too rich for your blood. You don't re-sign him, and you go get yourself a contributing bench player that can space the floor, shoot from the outside, has a bit of a big body, and then a pure point guard, even if it is a second tier type talent, just to balance you out, to make it a little bit easier for Cam Thomas to play. And then also Mikal Bridges, by the way. This isn't putting superstars ahead of them, but it's at least saying no longer is the ball in your hands in the offensive end, saying take the guy off the dribble, create your own shot. It's not a part of his bag. So you need to put other pieces to just slot guys where they need to fit.
And this is, and this is still so interesting. And we're still at such a crossroads with the Nets. We just don't know what their overall plan is. I mean, it sure seems like it's Claxton and then wait till 2025. If I had to place my chips into one basket, like of guessing exactly what they would do, that would be it. It would just be re-sign him, clear Simmons, and hope and pray that someone shakes loose in 2025. But it's just as easy to see on a functional level a full pivot away from that and just restocking the roster with guys who just can like moderately help now, and then we'll still see what happens and Claxton's not on the roster. And the point guard thing is just so crucial. They just haven't had a point guard since Harden, basically. And even before that, it wasn't like they had amazing point guard play. They ran just like D'Lo pick and roll, and Kyrie's more of an off-ball scorer. He's not a point guard, right? Like they just haven't had this kind of guy at all. The closest they had was Dinwiddie, and I know fans got totally sick of seeing that happen like for a long time, and then he just stopped doing it altogether. So like the point guard plays, it's been so bad for the Nets for years and years outside of the time they had Harden.
And again, it always comes back to, you don't need superstars, but even just guys that are in the right mold of that player and are trying to do it. It shows you the footprint of, oh, well, with better versions of this, we could be a team of X caliber. So it's something to watch for here, obviously, throughout the course of the offseason. And oh, by the way, another little factor in here is getting to the draft. If the Nets get back in there and they can draft a player in the mid rounds of the first round, that might be a part of this offseason process. And we'll learn more about that and start to spotlight some of those front court players that might be viable if Brooklyn can get back in the mix.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated for everyone, to everyone. The appreciation
everything for everybody, I think.
We're showing you appreciation for sticking with us through the off season. Really seeing the numbers just continue, like just to spike on YouTube, especially. Like really, we're almost maybe by the time we say this, we'll be up over 7,000 subscribers. Really, really appreciate it, what everyone's doing. Comments, all of it. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Do them both. They both help. Yeah, doing both. Subscribe, Locked On Nets YouTube. I'm repeating myself. I'm so happy. Yeah. Locked On Nets YouTube, Locked On Nets, wherever you listen to podcasts. There you go. Point stop period.
The Brooklyn Nets might be at a bit of a crossroads this offseason, and all we have is now. And right now we have each other, and that's from Lucy Wagner, and that's coming out of the Britney Spears Crossroads feature. That's right, 2002, ladies and gentlemen.
One of the all-time great poets, obviously. And one of the all-time great movies.
Sure.
We'll be back again tomorrow.
They're both so good.
So we've gone off the rails here at the end. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.